On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
And Jews as such will still be a problem for them. Not in the sense that they're going to go around looking for Jews to target, but in the sense that they will create increasing demands that Canadian Jews, as the sort of price of entry to their coalition, have to abandon their own ethnic interests, even as the ethnic interests of other groups will continue to be sort of fed pretty much at random.
I'm Phoebe Maltz Bovy, and you're listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the Canadian Jewish News. So today is Monday, April 28th, that we are recording this podcast, and it is Election Day here in Canada, federal elections. And there is a lot to think about, who will win, which you will know when you're listening to this the following day. But also, what does it all mean? Is Canada just America but a little colder, or is it actually its own country with its own stuff going on? So here to talk about that with us today is David Polansky, who is a research fellow with the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy. He has a doctorate in political science from the University of Toronto, and as a PhD myself, I will suggest that he and I refer to each other as doctor throughout this conversation. Of course, don't worry, I'm kidding. He's also a commentator for a number of publications, including the major newspapers in Canada, as well as The Hub, all sorts of places. I enjoy reading his work and following him on social media, so I thought, you know what? He's written a lot of interesting stuff on this topic, so let's chat. So, David, welcome to The Jewish Angle.
Thanks for having me.
So I only know you from the internet, but that's why I just put together that you're American. So, are you also Canadian?
No, I'm strictly American. I haven't quite gotten it together to actually make myself a true Canadian. I reside here. My wife's Canadian. I guess my kids are Canadian, as they like to point out to me.
Well, fair enough. I was wondering though, just because I've experienced this, do people ask you these days if you moved here because of Trump? Like, do you get a whole kind of political spiel from like acquaintances, strangers, whatever?
I used to get that more after 2016. Some of that may have died. Some of that excitement may have died down. I do have to. I don't as much have to confirm that this is not a political statement. It was a marital statement. Combined with, as you say, my coming here for do my grad work at U of T, which was a great program I quite liked. And over time, I hope I haven't become more Canadian. That would be.
What year did you move to Canada?
God, this was in 2009. So I'm really,
okay.
After my master's, I went to Vancouver, followed my wife there, and had a wonderful year. I quite like Vancouver, even though it has no bookstores. And then I ended up both marrying and also applying for U of T, which was a program I was really interested in. And I couldn't figure out a good enough reason to leave, given the horrendousness of the academic job market, as well as the sense that Toronto would be a nice place to raise our kids, which it has been mostly.
So I'm just wondering, the liberals and progressive institutions doing this flag waving has been strange to me. So I moved here in 2015. Mm-hmm. When I moved here, Canadian flag waving just seemed like a nice sort of, anodyne thing. Then it became extremely out of fashion, and now it's everywhere. And it can feel, I get that it can sort of feel a little bit hypocritical, and it can also just feel sort of odd. Like I get very confused when I see a car now with Canadian flags on it, right? But then there's this other piece, which is that I wonder, like, are conservatives now being tarnished from their association with Trump and sort of Trumpism, where there was this trucker protest moment, and then there was this Trumpist moment. And I'm thinking, this is going to seem a little bit out there, but I did prepare you for this beforehand, of a house in my neighborhood that was all in my neighborhood in Toronto, to be clear, that was all in for Trump, took those signs down, and is now all in for the conservatives. So what's going on?
There's a larger issue, which is just the extraordinary gravitational pull of the United States. And that's been a concern for the small handful of Canadian conservatives that are going back decades. George Grant used to complain about it in the 60s, and insist that, if Canada couldn't develop a sense of its national identity, it would sort of ineluctably be drawn into the U.S. orbit. That's very much happened. I remember after the Raptors won in 2019, there was a spate of articles saying, look, this shows like Canada's becoming a kind of more global country, which I thought was very silly and funny because I'm not a hockey guy. I don't understand hockey at all. I watch hockey games and I can't figure out where the puck is going. I'm like an idiot. And I love basketball. But it was very clear to me that what you were seeing was an Americanization of Canada that was getting called globalization. Because really, the United States it's such a powerful effect. It's not strange to me then that it would also begin to intrude on the politics of Canada. And some of the flag waving, I have to assume, let's say the Liberals win today, I have to assume the flag waving dies down because it's been highly instrumental. It's been a way of saying we're the true patriots, unlike those conservatives who are sort of de facto Trumpists and therefore possibly Quislings of some kind.
Like you write about the Liberals and conservatives being kind of the opposite of what their names suggest. But I think that's well, let me just start with this. Do you think that that's also true of the Democrats and the Republicans, that which is the party of status quo and which is the party of shake things up, it seems?
Yeah, I do. It's more pronounced. It's maybe more pronounced here simply because of because of the dominance that the Liberal Party has had, and the parliamentary system allows it to hang on much longer than more than you would get for a party in the States, I suspect. So I think that's more pronounced here. But this is a generally true, I think, phenomenon in which these terms just sort of have been hollowed out. They don't have much meaning anymore. Like, I don't know what it means to when we use them very lazily. I don't know what it means to say that such and such, in the United States is right wing, or conservative. To me, these things were, and for that matter, the same is probably true of a lot of leftism to my mind too.
Well, a lot seems to be about funding of things like public health care, education, and that's what seems like the least ambiguous to me. And I guess a little bit now with the sort of wokeness versus anti-wokeness, although I think that's also changed somewhat drastically, possibly with Mark Carney. But I guess something I'm also wondering about, like with the flag waving and stuff, is why has there been this turn to nationalism rather than than a globalism that excludes the U.S.? Because I'm thinking specifically of the Buy Canadian movement. Why has it not been boycott the U.S.? Why is there everywhere you look a guide to how to only buy stuff from Canada, which can sometimes seem a little preposterous depending on the type of product? But what's going on there?
Yeah, if you only buy in Canada, you're going to run it. You're very quickly going to run into the Saul Bellow problem, where he talks about how you cannot. Bananas are preposterously expensive, but salmon is everywhere. No, my basic take on this is the same I had for a while now, which is that nationalism is always going to be the default move. It has to do with the basic structure of modern politics. There's no getting around it, and as a result, so much of what we think of as globalism is very thin. It's for people who have the means, who either have the means to essentially be globalist. And as I say this as a rootless cosmopolitan, I'm just a guy living in a foreign country who's lived in other foreign countries. But the average person is not a globalist. Globalization does, as an economic and as a market-driven phenomenon, that does very much shape their lives. But it's not part of their identity, and it's not part of how they live their lives. Carney's a globalist. And I don't even mean that as an insult. That's just a fact to my mind. But that doesn't really describe how people live. It doesn't describe the structure of democracies. And it is the nature of democracy to push us back toward nationalism, because at some point you have to figure out, well, who are we and who represents us? And this has always been a tension, I think, in liberalism. There's no getting around it. So it's not surprising to me that Canadians would fall back on this kind of nationalism. Invariably, it takes stupid forms because nationalism is often stupid. There's no way of getting around that either.
Are you referring to the Dollarama umbrella Canadian flag hats? Or no, just kidding. Maybe, I don't know.
You can choose your example. Yeah. Nationalism is silly. It's always silly. It's always a little bit silly.
Well, I guess anything that's on an umbrella hat is going to be silly, even if it's a very serious message. But so another thing, so this show is called The Jewish Angle, and this is definitely not me overcompensating for the absence of Jewish angles here or there. But here is a question that has one, which is that Jews seem to be leaning more conservative in this election from the coverage I've read, from what polling there's been done. But I'm wondering, so American Jews also had this whole discourse. There was this whole discourse cycle that American Jews had seen the encampment protests, which were really like this started and was really a big thing in the U.S. in particular. It was certainly like sort of left-wing anti-Semitism or whatever you want to call it. That seemed newer in the U.S. than it is elsewhere. It was more jarring in the U.S. than it was elsewhere. And there was this whole narrative about how American Jews were so shocked by this and now we're going to vote for Trump. And then this didn't happen. So why is this is this different in Canada? And if so, why?
It's a good question. I mean, it's hard to say. These things take time, for one thing. I mean, voting Democrat and being liberal is outside of certain parts of like Boca Raton and things like that, is such a core part of, I think, a Jewish identity. It's the old joke, they vote like Hispanics and they aren't like Episcopalians. It's hard. I mean, these things take time to change. The issue in Canada, to my mind, is that, first of all, you've had more striking and radical demographic change. And this has impacted the way that liberals build their coalition, by which I mean the Liberal Party. And Jews are the ultimate. Look, I say this. I should have warned you. I'm only half Jewish before you invited me on your Jewish themed podcast.
That means that we just like stop. We record only half of each sentence and then just leave the audience listening, just guessing. Yeah,
that makes sense. Right. Okay. You put a little asterisk by the. I do think that the Jews are. I mean, they're the ultimate minority, which say they're even the minority among other minorities, and they inevitably create problems for the Liberal coalition. You see the sample in Toronto. I mean, Olivia Chow, and I'm not trying, and I'm not. I don't mean this in an ethnocentric way, but this is a mayor who has never found a cause that she cannot jump onto. But has been, as I think people have noticed, like she's very distant when it comes to the Jewish things, even after there have been attacks on Jewish businesses and some fairly nasty and fairly visible expressions of what I think what you would have to call anti-Semitism. Do I think is it a major danger? Is it, does it really impact people's lives on a daily basis? I think it doesn't. But at the same time, we are seeing things that just didn't used to happen here. Do I think does it mean the Liberal Party is anti-Semitic as such? No, of course not. Does it mean that their coalition prevents them from dealing with the problem of anti-Semitism? Yeah, I think it does.
So I want to just ask a bit more about that, because when I think about, like, for my column this week, I was thinking about, like, what is it that I would, if I just restricted to this sort of as a Jew voting, which, obviously people vote, including myself, on the basis of different things and not just that. But, like, do I want the candidate or the party that's most vocally anti-Semitic, or do I want something else? And by the something else, I don't mean an anti-Semitic political party, obviously, but I mean just like, human rights, making sure everybody gets along, making sure that conflicts from abroad don't get imported into Canada, things like that, And I feel like I see what happens in the US. I see what's happening with Trump making a whole thing of the fight against anti-Semitism and doing things that, if nothing else, they're not really obviously fighting anti-Semitism. And then there is the whole, like, deporting people without due process angle. But the point is, like, I see all of this and I think, is what I think Canada's missing a more fervent fight against anti-Semitism or something else? And then it's like, I guess, is it just that I'm the oddball, or is it that I'm being naive? And it's like there really has been just inaction where there needed to be action.
I mean, look, the great thing about Trump is that he's so blunt that he puts things, he makes these sort of he makes what is often tacit explicit. I mean, he's almost telling you up front, of course I'm using this issue, in the most obvious and sort of blunt and gross way. And there's something clarifying about that. For what it's worth, I don't think that, I don't like it when I talk, when I see Jews or anybody just sort of very clearly voting what they perceive as their ethnic interests. And this was, in fact, Lee Kuan Yew's criticism of multi-ethnic democracy. He says all that happens is, it becomes a battle of ethnicities. Everyone votes their ethnic interest, not their material interest, and things aren't governed well. So I don't think that should be the sole criterion or anything like that. I wouldn't describe that as the most pressing issue, even for Jews in Canada. I don't think the question really is sort of what direction is it going? Do I think that it's likely that we'll see more anti-Semitism, both as a result of a sort of unserious immigration regime combined with what I would predict would be the increased influence of the NDP and Green voters on the Liberal Party, as their own parties continue sort of these electoral collapses. My guess is those things will happen, and Jews as such will still be a problem for them. Not in the sense that they're going to go around looking for Jews to target, but in the sense that they will create increasing demands that Canadian Jews, as the sort of price of entry to their coalition, have to abandon their own ethnic interests, even as the ethnic interests of other groups will continue to be sort of fed pretty much at random.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
So do you think the U.S. is more sort of resistant to at least left anti-Semitism than like Europe or Canada?
I do. I think that Canada is more European in this way, maybe. And I think also that, I do think the threat of anti-Semitism in America is overstated for various political and instrumental reasons. And to the extent that it's a problem on campus, it's a highly specific problem that doesn't lend itself. I think American academia has a million problems, but I don't think they're necessarily susceptible to, the political process in very helpful ways. They benefit the political process insofar as you can make hay out of it.
Well, I don't know how much of academia will be left in America if it's...
Yeah, that's a problem. Although, that there are very good reasons why academia should be like comprehensively reformed that have nothing to do with, whatever the Republican Party's worrying about at a given day.
Right. Like graduating a ton of PhDs for jobs that don't exist. I saw the stuff, like when I saw the stuff about people suddenly learning they weren't going to get into the program they were going to, I thought, okay, well, that's a horrible way to do it, but there probably were too many spots.
Or was it good? Like,
well, you don't want to hear it. You don't want to get an offer letter and have it rescinded. Like, I don't think that's the way to approach. But
no, that part no. But but the point is, you can dislike how it happens, but at the end of the day, like those offer letters shouldn't be going out in the first place.
It's
in the vast majority of cases, and I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean, like, you're not helping somebody by saying, here's not enough money to live on for many years, followed by which you will not have a job.
Yeah. I went down that road. It was all right, but I never wanted to be a professor, which probably
that helps
with the whole not becoming one. But so you wrote and I believe this was one of your pieces for the Hub that this culture war is not really applicable to like the culture war of the U.S. to Canada's social and political disputes. But I'm just sort of wondering, like, is that still true? Like, I would have said that's true before, but I'm just thinking, like, even if you're not happy with how the Liberals have run Canada for the last decade, even if that's where you're coming from with this, if you look to the U.S. and see what happens when someone comes in to shake things up and there's just chaos, and it's not particularly, like, if you're concerned about the price of, just the cost of living, I don't need to do the price of specific item by item, but, if you're worried about that and you see what's happening in the U.S., like, is there a sort of like no culture wars don't apply here in the same way?
I don't know if I would call that culture war simply because its dispute has to do with material terms.
Right,
You
right.
can get that wrong, or that can become, heavily susceptible to, loaded rhetoric. But when I think of cultural war issues, I think more of things like, gay marriage, abortion, things like that. Issues that mostly just aren't really debated in Canada, and I don't think are important. Don't strike me from what I can see as important themes for either conservatives or liberal voters, except insofar as they might pull in votes.
Well, I wanted to ask actually, so more about that. I mean, I was thinking the reason I had said culture wars, I wasn't very clear about this. I was thinking more the sort of like your privilege is showing if you vote for a conservative,
Yeah,
or your privilege is showing if you
obvious.
vote for a liberal. But also just the omni cause. I want to talk about the omni cause because I feel like that is where culture wars kind of plays into things in Canada. And by omni cause, for people who haven't listened to every single the Canadian Jewish News podcast since the dawn of time, we have talked about it on these before, but like Queers for Palestine would be the omni cause. If anybody ever puts together who I am and knows I said that on a podcast, I will not be allowed in any coffee shop within like whichever radius of my house, but that's fine.
Or bookstore.
Yeah, so my sense is that Canada is still kind of pro-omni cause in ways that the US is not. And sometimes I get the sense that Canada is kind of lagging behind in some of this, or even maybe presenting itself as a refuge, at least symbolically, even though people aren't moving from the States to Canada. Like an article is written about it every time it happens, right? But which tells you something. But then I also see stuff like in the Globe and Mail's business supplement, which literally like it was sitting in front of me and my kids were being very active, whatever, and I could only read one thing. So I was like, I guess I'm going to read about business. So I read something about how DEI is like less popular now here, and like some business leaders are taking this as a moment to kind of do that. And also my limited sense of the difference between Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau is that like maybe Justin Trudeau was a little bit more on board with some of the stuff. So I'm trying to make sense of like, where does Canada fit in terms of culture wars, and also just this election? Like, how much does anti-woke matter? Is that factoring in at all? Or is it just like people play a clip of this because it does well on social media? Like of Poilievre saying he's anti-woke.
It's a good question. I don't see the same backlash here. Partly because just from an institutional standpoint, you don't have the kinds of institutions in Canada that could fund and promote a backlash. And even the ones that I think are more countercultural are sort of cagey about playing. I think it's just not their style, and because that feels wrong for Canada. And Canada generally there's a kind of reticence in the political culture that has its benefits. For one thing, it keeps things from getting too hot, which is useful in democracy. On the omnicause thing, yeah, that convergence, it's a very leftist phenomenon, that convergence of all issues into one issue. It's environmentalism and it's queerness and it's Gaza, etc. Whether that makes sense or not. That's the thing you see. The thing about Canada is like, this is going to sound mean. The institutions are mostly become really mediocre. They're not good. The elites are really unimpressive. And so, for example, you see this wave of, look at all these American academics who are coming here to like, and look, we're getting like, those are hacks. Like everybody knows, like these people are jokes, and now they're just coming here to just take advantage of your nice little system. Like you should be hiring real scholars, not these clowns. Like that's embarrassing. You should know better. And I think the failure of there is a mediocrity to Canadian elites, and they've been mediocre for a long time, and it worked as long as you had pretty sturdy institutions. But eventually the institutions got hollowed out by that same mediocrity. And in turn, once that kind of progressive omnicause started to enter those institutions, there was no robust opposition. And I don't mean an opposition in a right-wing sense, just an opposition in the sense of an institutional mission that would say, this is not what we do. We actually do think our job is to gather news, or our job is to do scholarship. And to some degree that happened in the States as well, for sure. But it happened worse. I think it happened worse here. And I think, and then you combine that with the fact that Canada is always going to be several years behind what's happening in the US, because it's receiving distant broadcasts.
Right. I mean, it also seems like there's this added level of like trying to distinguish itself from the US. And if the US has gone off this, just one more question on this, and let's just make this the last formal question, which is just does this Omnicause stuff explain Jews going off the liberals? Like, do you think that that explains, like, the sense that, and I mean, again, this is going to be super anecdotal, but like this sort of sea of NDP signs with Free Palestine signs together, well, that's not liberals, does that explain the embrace of conservatives?
Yeah, I mean, if you tell people like, I think it's hard for, it's going to, look, it's, yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard for Jews to see Palestine, for I think most Jews who are not really committed, who are not already committed, as there are obviously some very highly vocal leftist Jews who are very committed to the cause of Palestine. I think it's hard for the average Jew, even the average non-particularly political Jew, but particularly after October 7th, to see Palestine as a worthy cause, even if they feel squeamish about what Israel has been doing since October 7th, or what Israel's been doing for the past 50 years. That's a hard cause. I mean, that's something tough to swallow, unless you're really committed to a kind of, as you said, the omnicause, in which case you can say, well, this is not in tension with my Judaism in some way. But you have to really have consciously gone for that. And I think the average, I talked to a lot of, what I would call, less sophisticated or less otherwise politically inclined Jews who were just very shocked, And I was talking to a guy in the music industry over the weekend. Like, they were just really, and he was saying all of his friends are just furious, and in the music industry are really mad about what happened with that dumb Irish rap group. I can't say the word Irish rap group without laughing, because just
you have to explain to listeners what this is.
Oh God, what was one of the concerts? What was it? Coachella? I can never remember. I can't keep all these festivals straight.
I'm in Toronto with little kids. I don't know.
Is profanity allowed on the?
I think so. As far as I'm concerned, yes. So okay. Yes.
I'm only quoting here, but I think I gather they led this Irish rap group. They consider themselves revolutionary types, and they led the crowd in a chant of "Fuck Israel." And I mean, and there was a sense that, okay, you should have known this was going to happen, and also a sense that, well, this is not very nice for the Jews in the crowd who maybe just didn't want to hear that. They could have lived with Free Palestine or something, but this was a bridge too far. And I think you're going to see, you'll see increasingly more of that, insofar as it's not just, well, this is in the mix, but this is the price of entry. You have to sort of turn on it, and you have to see, it gets tricky then.
Let's say it's Tuesday. Who won and why?
If liberals, I think a combination of the Ontario boomers are very powerful. There's a lot of them, they're very comfortable. They're some of the most comfortable people who have ever lived in like the past 100,000 years. It's very hard to shake them out of their complacency and their sense that, things are going fine. You combine the fact that they're not materially threatened with this really kind of exciting and I would say pleasurable sense of the ability to actually and uncomplicatedly demonstrate Canadian patriotism is very fun for them. They don't get to do that much. And most people, we want to do that stuff, and contemporary liberalism doesn't let us, participate in those kinds of public passions in that uncomplicated way anymore. So that's really fun. Like, I don't blame them for wanting to do that. I don't even blame them for accumulating so many assets. I just resent them.
I was going to be like, if they have like a spare cottage or two. No, but just kidding. Yes, go on.
Yeah, and then, you have them plus your sort of quislings like you who have betrayed our generation.
And what if it goes the other way? You're going to do that one too?
If it goes the other way, then it's simply that enough people are fed up with the governance of the country after 10 years. It's not strange. They threw out Harbour after 10 years for no particular reason. They were just like, oh, we're done with this guy. So it's not shocking to throw out a government after 10 years. And I think this government does have a real legacy of failures. So, and there are perfectly good reasons. The question is, do they add up enough, and are they persuasive to enough people? Because in a sense, as I try to argue, I think they're not just voting for one party over the other. The way that this election has been framed, they're voting against a kind of establishment. And that is harder.
Well, I guess we will find out soon enough. And where can we find your stuff?
My stuff is all over right now. I'm on X, Twitter, whatever you call it, too much. You can also find me at strangefrequencies.co, where I just write on all manner of things that I don't feel like pitching to editors.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the Canadian Jewish News. This has been Phoebe Maltz Bovy, opinion editor of the CJN and a contributing editor of Scribe Quarterly, the CJN's print magazine. The show is produced and edited by Michael Fraiman. Marc Weisblott is the editorial director of the CJN. Our music is by Frank Fraiman. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to The Jewish Angle wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.